So as you read the directions for example 1, you're going to notice that the author has asked us to do two things. Find the slope of several lines, and then the equations of those lines as well. So let's go ahead and start with example 1a. So as you look at example 1a, remember once again that our slope, m, is rise over run. So what we can do is go from one point to another point on this line, but instead of going along the line itself, we can think about this rise over run idea, and we can use a stair step. So I want to go from this point to that point, but instead of traveling along the line, I want to do a stair step. I'm going to go straight down, and I'm going to go straight to the right. And what I want to do then is count out how many tick marks that I traveled through along the y, and then count out how many tick marks I traveled through along the x. Well, as you count out the number of tick marks that we traveled along the y, you're going to see that we went 4 units. But we went 4 units down. And because we went 4 units down, that means then that our rise is going to be -4. So once again, rise is -4. So m is rise over run. So that means our m is going to be -4 divided by someone. Well, let's figure out our run then. The run is going to be then the change in the x's to get from here to here. And once again, as you count out the number of tick marks that you've traveled through, you're going to see that we traveled through 2 tick marks to make that happen. And because we went to the right, that's going to be a +2. So our run is going to be +2. So that means our slope then is -4 divided by +2. But that's a fraction, and in general you want to simplify fractions as much as possible. So a -4 divided by a +2, negative divided by a positive is going to be a negative, and then 4 divided by 2 is going to be 2. So the slope of this line is -2. So now that we know that piece of information, we can use that to write down our equation. So remember that we have this idea of slope-intercept form. Y equals mx plus b. M, we just calculated to be -2. So the equation of our line is going to be y equals -2x plus. Well, b is going to be the y coordinate of our y-intercept. So as you look at the graph, you're going to see that our graph crosses through the y-axis at -3. So that means then that our b value is going to be -3. So we can come in and then say plus that -3. However, once again, you should always simplify things as much as possible. So having a plus sign and then a subtraction symbol after that, that can always be simplified. Adding a negative is the same as subtracting. So that means that we can take this equation and write it as y equals -2x minus 3. And that's a nice, simple version of our equation. Now, at this point, we're done with this particular problem. However, you need to be aware of the fact that every so often, your author in the MyLab Math system will ask you to write down your equation in a very special format. He'll ask you to write it in function notation. And what he's asking for when he asks you to write down the equation in function notation is to simply take this y on the left-hand side and replace it by an f of x. So this y has now become f of x, and we just write down the right-hand side as it was, -2x minus 3. Now, as you continue on with other math classes, you'll learn more about that functional notation, but for us, we're just going to use the idea that the y and the f of x are playing the same role. So f of x equals -2x minus 3 is the same answer, it just is written in this functional notation, and if the author requests that, know that that's what he's asking for. So now that we have that done, we're ready to check out part B. Now, in part B, we're going to do many of the same things. However, you have to be kind of careful because your author likes to play some games. He doesn't do it on every problem, but he does it frequently enough that you need to be aware of it. That sometimes he doesn't necessarily give you the tick marks being one apart. And you have to notice that there's a scale being used. So as you look at B, you're going to notice that my tick marks are not one apart. There's a scale that is happening on the x-axis and a different scale that's happening along the y. So when you're thinking about your rise and you're thinking about your run and you're thinking about your y-intercept, you have to keep those kinds of ideas in mind. So let's go ahead and check out part B, and again, keep those ideas of scales in mind. So once again, I want to go from one point to the other point, and in order to make that happen, I'm going to have to go up and then to the right. Well, I'm going to count out how many tick marks I went up. I went up 1 tick mark, but that doesn't mean then that I'm going to have a change in y being 1. If you figure out what's happening in terms of the scale, you're going to see that every tick mark means that we're going up by 5. So our change in y in this problem is in fact a positive 5. And then we need to do the same kind of thing when we think about the run. Our run, when you count out tick marks, you're going to see that we went to the right 3 tick marks. But our tick marks are going to be associated with 10 units each. So instead of saying that I went to the right 3 units, I would say that I went to the right 30 units. Because once again, every tick mark is associated with 10 units. So now that I have that then, my slope, once again, is going to be rise over run. So I have a rise of positive 5, and I have a run of positive 30. Well, 5 divided by 30, once again, can be simplified, so you need to reduce that fraction. 5 and 30 are both divisible by 5, so our slope on this problem is 1 divided by 6. So now that I have my slope, I'm almost ready to write down my equation. So we're going to have y equals m, we just calculated that to be 1/6, x plus b. And what we need to do then is figure out where we're crossing through the y-axis, because again, b is the y-coordinate of the y-intercept. So it looks like we're crossing at 1 tick mark above the x-axis, but again, be careful with your scale. 1 above the x-axis means that we're crossing through the y at 5. So that means that our y-intercept is the point 0, 5, which means that our b value is the number 5. So that means then that our equation is y equals 1/6 x plus 5.